It's 5 p.m. across India. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh, live from New Delhi. You're watching DD India Global, bringing you all day's big stories from across India and the world. With me today from London is my colleague, Ollie Barrett. Ollie, it's good to see you.
Hello Shubhendu, it's 11:30 a.m. here in the UK, 12:30 p.m. across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, we'll have the latest from Gaza. The UK tries again at its controversial Rwanda migration policy, and why Paris is hosting a climate summit at the same time as COP28. First, the headlines.
Israeli military advances southward in the Gaza Strip. US pushes for release of additional hostages held by Hamas. Kenya's President William Ruto holds talks with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New Delhi, agree on joint maritime cooperation. Cyclone Michaung continues to make a landfall in India's Andhra Pradesh, state put on high alert. It's now been 4 days since the one-week temporary ceasefire between Israel and Gaza lapsed, and Israeli military is now advancing southward in the Gaza Strip. Israeli government spokesperson said they expect difficult fighting in the new phase of war in Gaza, but are open to constructive feedback on minimizing harm to civilians as long as there is consistent advice on its aim of destroying Hamas. Israeli tanks and other armored vehicles are reported to be operating close to Khan Yunis, the largest city in southern Gaza. The intensified strikes come after having largely gained control of the now devastated north. An Israeli army spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, said that Hamas deliberately embeds itself among civilians so that Gazans bear the consequences of Hamas's atrocities.
New phase in our war against Hamas. Hamas broke the humanitarian pause when it violated the hostage release agreement by refusing to release women, children, and babies as agreed. Hamas also fired rockets at Israeli homes. It should be clear to everyone by now, Hamas chooses war. It has been 8 weeks since October 7th, and Hamas is still holding 137 of our people hostage. Babies, the elderly, women and men. Hamas does not value human life.
The U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said United States will continue to press for release of additional hostages held by Hamas in Gaza.
We're still talking about trying to find a way forward on hostages. We're talking about sustaining and expanding the humanitarian assistance, making it into Gaza. Right now, Hamas is refusing to release civilian women who should have been part of the agreement. And it is that refusal by Hamas that has caused the end of the hostage agreement and therefore the end of the pause in hostilities.
That's the latest coming in from Israel-Gaza conflict during a United Nations event organized by Israel in New York on Monday that focused on sexual violence against women during the October 7th attack by Hamas. U.S. Senator from New York, Kirsten Gillibrand, said that UN must hold Hamas accountable for its actions.
The world community must do more. It must demand accountability for these intolerable crimes. The United Nations must denounce Hamas as a terrorist organization that uses rape as a weapon of war. The United Nations must live up to its purpose of upholding the principles of international law, and the United Nations must condemn these evil crimes against humanity.
And DD India's Sarah Coates joins us live from Tel Aviv. Sarah, what are the implications of the conflict moving southwards of Gaza?
Hello there. Well, look, we've just heard from the IDF that troops are now operating north of Khan Yunis. Khan Yunis is a city that was home to around 450,000 people before all of this, but now there is an evacuation order in place. We can report that in the last hour or so that the IDF has been dropping leaflets on the homes of people who live there, telling them to move further and further south down toward Rafah. Now, your viewers may remember Rafah. It's that crossing that most of this aid has been coming through, although already today we've heard from the United Nations, which says that no aid has come into the Strip at all today, simply due to the intense Israeli bombardment. Now, the IDF has just posted on X saying that it will now leave a gap down in the south for fighting for a number of hours to allow these aid trucks in, but it's also warning residents not to use Salah al-Din Road. This is the road that connects the north to the south, with reports there that there's heavy fighting on this road. So certainly a lot of concern given these pictures we are seeing coming in from a number of hospitals, like the Nasser Hospital, which is in Khan Yunis. Workers inside that hospital say that it has now become completely overwhelmed and they are unable to treat the amount of injuries that are pouring in. So certainly a very worrying situation, but also in the north, fighting is continuing. The Israeli military says it's now completely surrounded the Jabalia refugee camp. It says it's destroyed a Hamas security headquarters in that camp and also other Hamas assets. And we do need to remind your viewers that this is an area that it considers a Hamas stronghold. So certainly a lot happening on the ground inside Gaza at this hour.
Sarah, thank you for joining us with those updates. Israel's offensive in Gaza continues. Ollie Barrett is in London, gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Ollie, we learned that UK is going to assist in the lookout for the hostages using surveillance flights.
That's right, Shibendu. The UK's Ministry of Defence saying it will carry out surveillance flights over the eastern Mediterranean, including operating in the airspace above Israel and above Gaza as well. These unarmed aircraft will not engage in combat, we're told by the UK, and will be tasked with locating hostages and passing that information onwards to the relevant authorities. France has implemented asset freezes, meanwhile, on Hamas Gaza chief Yahya Sinwar. It's adding him to the country's national sanctions list. Previously, France imposed sanctions at the national level on Hamas military commander Mohammed Deif and his deputy Marwan Issa. France is working with partners to impose sanctions on Hamas individuals and its wider financing network. British Home Secretary James Cleverly is in Rwanda to finalise a new treaty for the deportation of asylum seekers following the UK's top court ruling last month that the previous version of the scheme was unlawful. Under the new arrangement between the two countries, Rwanda will make commitments about the treatment of asylum seekers that the UK plans to send there to have their claims processed. The UK has made an initial payment of $180 million to Rwanda for a scheme the opposition Labour Party in the UK says is an expensive gimmick. Next to France, which is hosting a finance-focused summit on climate and growth, bringing together scientific and economic experts to address challenges in keeping to commitments of the Paris 2015 climate agreement. Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates, who's been speaking at the summit, says no country is going as fast as it could when it comes to developing and innovating renewable solutions to the climate crisis. Well, DD India's Ross Cullen joins me now from the summit. And Ross, tell me, what exactly has Bill Gates been saying, and who else is attending this summit?
Oh, hi, Ollie. I've just stepped outside the conference venue, which is here at the French Ministry of Finance. And Bill Gates has been speaking this morning, the co-founder of Microsoft, saying that we are behind on our short-term goals in terms of innovative solutions to try to continue to bring down emissions, bring down pollution and increase protection for biodiversity. But overall, he sounded a bit of an optimistic note at the end of his speech, speaking to the French Finance Minister, Bruno Le Maire, as well. And Mr. Gates going on to say that the European grid needs to be 3 times bigger in terms of its electricity going forward, that rich countries also owe it to the world to keep costs down for the green transition in developing countries. Also, Mr. Gates remarking on artificial intelligence, AI, saying that there are weather forecasts, the AI-based models for data, for farmers, for crops and seeds in developing countries, another way that they're using artificial intelligence. He was joined on stage by a range of people. We have had economists, we have had the chief economist from the International Monetary Fund, other speakers from the Green Agenda, from science, from economy, and France's finance minister Bruno Le Maire was also speaking at this event. He said that there needs to be a real focus now on innovative solutions going forward, particularly in Europe, saying that we need to avoid greenwashing, that we need to focus on our aid budget and make sure that we are increasing our nuclear capacity, France is trying to become the major first decarbonised economy in Europe by the year 2040.
OK, Ross, and why, though, is this summit being hosted at the same time as COP28 in Dubai?
Every 2 years, this summit is hosted. It's known as the Rendezvous de Bercy, the get-together at Bercy, which is the name of the district where the finance ministry is located. The first edition in 2017 focused on technological disruption. The next one in 2019 focused on redefining capitalism in the 21st century. 2021 was cancelled due to the coronavirus pandemic, so they're back on track now with this event. Also coinciding with COP, a focus on climate and growth here in France, at the same time as a focus on climate and growth in Dubai. Bill Gates was remarking on the fact that he was there in the United Arab Emirates recently in the first couple of days of COP28, saying that he had seen more innovation at this year's COP than at previous editions. We do know that the French President Emmanuel Macron has also been attending the first couple of days of the COP meetings in the United Arab Emirates. So they have coincided this year, but it keeps up that momentum, keeps up that focus on the imperative to deal with the climate crisis. Bruno Le Maire, the French finance minister, saying that they are intertwined. You cannot speak about the economy or ecology without mentioning the other. Ollie?
Thanks, Ross. At least 2 people have been killed in a Russian attack on the southern Ukrainian city of Kherson. Russian air defense forces say they intercepted 41 Ukrainian drones, and 26 drones were destroyed over Russian territory. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian army says it shot down 10 of 17 Russian drones launched overnight, and has also accused Russia of firing missiles at civilian areas. Meanwhile, the United States has warned that funds for Ukraine will run out by the end of the year. It says Kiev would be kneecapped in its war against Russia if Congress fails to approve new aid. DD India's Kate Fisher reports from Washington.
There is no magical pot of funding available. We are out of money and nearly out of time. That's the stark warning from the White House's budget director in a letter to congressional leaders, calling on them to pass President Joe Biden's request for $106 billion in emergency funding. That total also covers his other foreign policy priorities, including Israel and the Indo-Pacific. Shalanda Young said that without congressional action, the US simply will run out of money by the end of the year to procure more weapons and equipment for Ukraine and to provide equipment from US military stocks. But President Biden's funding request remains on Capitol Hill under mounting Republican opposition to helping Kyiv. Some lawmakers, especially in the Senate, where backing for Ukraine runs deeper, are trying to negotiate a bipartisan deal that would contain aid for Kyiv, alongside new immigration procedures to reduce the number of migrants arriving in the US through its southern border. But those talks appear to be faltering, and even if it gets through the Senate, it's unclear if it can pass the Republican-led House, whose new Speaker, Mike Johnson, has been sceptical of funding for Ukraine. Kate Fisher in Washington, reporting for DD India.
Russian President Vladimir Putin will visit Saudi Arabia and the UAE on Wednesday as Moscow courts allies abroad, despite being isolated over the Ukraine conflict. Vladimir Putin will also host Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi in Moscow this week. The Kremlin says the Russian president will discuss bilateral ties, the Israel-Hamas conflict, energy and regional politics. Cuba and Iran have signed a series of bilateral agreements in Tehran during a meeting between both countries' presidents. It was the first visit by a Cuban president to Iran in over 20 years. Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi called his Cuban counterpart Miguel Diaz-Canel's visit a turning point in their bilateral ties. Both Cuba and Iran have been hit by US sanctions. Cuba has been under US embargo since 1962.
On the Cuban president's visit to Iran, a visit after 21 years, it is a very important visit, and we consider it as a turning point in the growing bilateral relation between the two brotherly peoples of Iran and Cuba.
Tanzania's government says the death toll from floods in the north of the country after torrential rains has now risen to 63. DD India's Isaac Lakanda reports from Dar es Salaam.
Tanzania is reeling from devastating floods and accompanying landslides that have hit its northern district of Hanang. Preceding the floods, prolonged drought rendered the soil dry and less water absorbent, elevating the risk of flash flooding. The toll is grim, with dozens of confirmed deaths already. The government notes that floods' impact is extensive, with over 1,150 households affected and approximately 300 hectares of farmland destroyed. Amidst the crisis, President Samia Suluhu Hassan, who was attending a UN climate summit in Dubai, has returned home to address the urgent situation. To aid relief efforts, approximately 400 rescue workers have been dispatched to the affected area. The government has committed to covering funeral expenses for the deceased, hospital fees for the injured, and providing temporary housing for those displaced. This disaster compounds a series of extreme weather events affecting East African nations, including Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, and South Sudan, where hundreds have lost their lives since the onset of the rainy season in October. Isaac Lukando in Dar es Salaam, reporting for DD India.
And we'll very much keep our eye on that story for you. For now, Shibendu, back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Oli, for joining us with those updates. And still to come on DD India Global. Multiple casualties in a blast in Pakistani city of Peshawar. The Netherlands returns colonial-era artifacts to Sri Lanka.
एक लंबे रक्तपात भरे युग का अंत धारा 370 के समाप्त होने से पहले।
For decades and decades, downtown area of Srinagar has always been symbolic of unrest, turbulence, turmoil, disturbances, and everything that has to do with the disruption.
पहले तो महीने में 20 दिन होता था हड़ताल, अब नहीं होती।
I'm right now standing in the middle of the Jama Masjid market, and this is how weekday here looks like.
जिनको होगा 1-2 करोड़ टर्नओवर है, बिल्कुल कैश टर्नओवर।
बंद क्या बंद? ये दुकान हालात बिल्कुल ठीक है, बिल्कुल ठीक है, कुछ नहीं होता है।
कश्मीर तो बेनजीर है, हीरा है, दंगा फसाद तो नहीं है।
The making of the Naya Kashmir or New Kashmir.
fact, every year, hundreds of thousands of Indian students go abroad to pursue higher education. But now, India has opened its doors for foreign higher education institutions who can set up and operate their campuses here.
Bringing these foreign university campuses will provide an additional opportunity to our students to study in foreign universities while staying in India.
How will you ensure that only the best universities come to India?
They should be within the top 500 ranks in the global rankings, although we have not specified any global ranking agency, but in general, or subject-wise, they should be within the 500 global rankings.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Global. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. India and Kenya signed MOUs in the presence of India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President of Kenya, William Samoei Ruto. At the joint press statement with President of Kenya, Prime Minister Modi said, India and Kenya are countries that have a shared past and future.
हाईटेक तथा आईसीसीआर स्कॉलरशिप के माध्यम से भारत के केनिया के लोगों की स्किल डेवलपमेंट और कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग में महत्वपूर्ण योगदान दिया है। दो कृषि प्रधान अर्थव्यवस्थाओं के रूप में हमने अपने अनुभव साझा करने पर सहमति जताई। केनिया के कृषि क्षेत्र का आधुनिकीकरण करने के लिए हमने $250 मिलियन की लाइन ऑफ क्रेडिट प्रदान करने का भी निर्णय लिया है। आधुनिक समय की जरूरतों के अनुसार हम टेक्नोलॉजी और इनोवेशन में अपना सहयोग बढ़ा रहे हैं। डिजिटल पब्लिक इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में भारत की उपलब्धियों को केनिया के साथ साझा करने के लिए हम पूरी तरह से तैयार हैं। इस महत्वपूर्ण विषय पर आज किए जा रहे समझौते से हमारे प्रयासों को बल मिलेगा।
At the joint press statement with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, President of Kenya, William Samoei Ruto said, we've had a long history of collaboration.
I have congratulated Prime Minister Modi for successfully hosting the G20 and for successfully championing the cause of the African people, the 1.4 billion people in our continent, that today, because of Prime Minister Modi's engagement and championship, the Africa Union is now a member of the G20. I have also congratulated Prime Minister Modi for his leadership in the Global South and for summoning us in the Global South to the Voice of the Global South Summit that I was privileged to attend virtually.
A special briefing on the state visit of President of Kenya to India was held today in India's capital, New Delhi. During the press briefing, Secretary Economic Relations Damu Ravi said Kenya President visit to India is happening after a successful Voice of the Global South Summit.
In the field of trade and investment, again, it's been quite encouraging. The bilateral trade is about $3.3 billion. A significant part of it is India's exports there. Kenya imports about 116 million. And the investments from India's side is about 3.2 billion. About 200 Indian companies are actively present in Kenya.
High Commissioner of India to Kenya, Namgyal Khampa, said Kenya has shown interest in trading in national currencies.
The Joint Maritime Vision Statement is really a recognition that as Indian Ocean littoral states, maritime exchanges and the maritime space has been a key part of our past, but also our future cooperation. And so we're looking at pillars under economic and connectivity exchanges. We're looking at maritime security, and Secretary referred to counterterrorism threats and challenges from the maritime domain that we can work on together with Kenya. We're looking at capacity building, and we're also looking at this entire bucket of issues around blue economy. And there's a lot of convergence in how we can progress on fleshing out these ideas, and the Joint Maritime Vision Statement, in a sense, provides us a blueprint to take it forward.
Moving on, the southern Indian coastal state of Andhra Pradesh remains on high alert as Cyclone Michaung continues to make a landfall. Michaung is expected to weaken into a cyclonic storm in the next couple of hours. The state government has issued an alert for 8 districts, including Tirupati, Nellore and West Godavari. Meanwhile, a 4-year-old boy died in Tirupati district after a wall collapsed amid rains. Over 300 relief camps have been set up for people evacuated from low-lying areas. India Met Department has warned state's coastal areas will receive extremely heavy rainfall. Let's now take a look at other stories making news around the world. Rescue personnel and ambulances arrive at the site of an apparent explosion in Pakistan's Peshawar city on Tuesday. At least 4 children and an adult were injured in the blast. 2 of the children are in critical condition. Nobody has claimed responsibility for the attack as yet. Divers from Danish Defence Force safely detonated a 130-kilogram deep-water bomb off the coast of Langeland Island in southern Denmark. The World War II bomb was discovered in a fisherman's net south of the island. In New Zealand, a Maori politician broke protocol in Parliament as he performed a Maori allegiance first before swearing an oath to Britain's King Charles III. New Zealand's Parliament opened on Tuesday with parliamentarians required to swear an oath to King Charles in order to be inducted as Member of Parliament. 6 colonial-era artifacts returned to Sri Lanka by the Netherlands were showcased at the Colombo National Museum on Tuesday, following a legal agreement signed by the 2 countries. The colonial artifacts include a bejeweled cannon of candy made of bronze, silver and gold seized in 1765 by soldiers of Dutch East India Company. Children and adults were delighted in Chile's capital Christmas Paris parade that paid tribute to Walt Disney Company for its 100th anniversary. Crowds packed Santiago's main avenues to get a glimpse of a giant balloons depicting iconic Disney characters such as Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. And that's all for this edition of DD India Global. Let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X and Instagram. You can also find us online at ddindia.co.in. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh from all of us here in Delhi. Thanks for watching DD India Global. Namaskar.